Push.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Hi, everybody. Welcome. Really excited to be sharing some of the updates in the API with you today. If you guys have questions, please put them into the Q&A. We'll try to answer them either as we go or after the session if we don't get to everything. Hopefully we'll have a little bit of time for answering some of those questions. Okay, like I said, I have a lot of slides, so I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. The first thing I wanted to mention is the safe harbor statement. This is all future looking functionality. We can't guarantee that any of this will make it out into the wild. And so please be careful about making purchasing decisions based on what you see here. With that, let me go ahead and jump into the Revit API updates. And the first thing I'm actually going to do before I jump in is I'm going to introduce myself for anybody who has not met me. I'm Sasha Karate. I'm the Revit product manager responsible for the Revit platform. So that includes things like multidisciplinary functionality in Revit, the API, and cloud services, including Revit Cloud Work Sharing and the Forge Design Automation API for Revit. So this is kind of what we anticipate the APIs to be in the future upcoming release, but again, no guarantees. The first thing I wanted to talk about a little bit is what we're doing with the Revit community. This is just for awareness so that everybody is aware of how to provide feedback, where to get information about what we're doing. We're trying to be as transparent as possible, and we're always kind of looking for other avenues to gather feedback. So we're always open, always open to hearing feedback, and give it to us if you've got it. In terms of things that we're doing, we're certainly focusing on cleaning up Revit ideas. This is a big. We have hired a Revit community manager. So even for API ideas, this is something that we'll be cleaning up and improving. So hopefully it'll be easier to find stuff. We do actively look at ideas in terms of identifying what improvements to make in the API. So please keep contributing to there. Certainly, we're looking to close the loop as well, and providing kind of as many blog post information, release marketing that we possibly can. And then we're also got the Revit preview release and inside the factory feedback, where we're really trying to increase kind of the conversation that we are having with all of you. If you haven't seen it yet, we have updated the Revit public roadmap to Trello. This actually allows us to kind of have a better understanding of which pieces are interesting to people. You can vote on items that you think are important, and we provide a little bit more detail than we did in our original roadmap. So it's exciting. We're starting to discuss an update to the roadmap, so keep an eye open for that in the next probably few months. If you're interested in finding out what we're actually working on, we encourage you to join the beta. And that includes, and there's two ways to do that. If you're an ADN member, you can go through the ADN portal. That's probably the fastest way. You can also email revit.preview.access@autodesk.com, and we can send you an invite to that. If you're curious, there's probably going to be questions around performance and kind of what we're doing with, with the cloud and things like that. We've done a number of inside the factory sessions in the fall. So a lot of these things are answered in detail directly from our team. So we kind of encourage you to check out these inside the factory sessions if you haven't seen them yet, and then to share them with people that you encounter if they have questions about some of these topics. Again, we're eager to have a conversation on this. And my last slide in the community topic is kind of other ways to provide feedback. We do have this new Autodesk research community, which is an easy way to kind of provide high-level feedback back to our team. This is is intended to be quick, fast things like our team's posting surveys. You'd be able to answer them, so that's not as time-intensive as the beta, perhaps. We also have a couple of email addresses that you are more than welcome to use if you want to send something directly to us. This goes directly to the product management team. That is, one of the emails is revitfeedback@autodesk.com. And the goal is send us anything. If you have a thought saying, hey, I need an answer, please do reach out to us. We want to hear from you. If you have performance challenges, we would love to get sample models because it is certainly an area of focus for us this year. So please do send those to us at revitperformance@autodesk.com. You don't have to send the file directly through email. We can kind of figure out that exchange, but do reach out to us with that alias. Okay, with that, switching to kind of what's new in the API. The way that we've done this for as long as I've been a PM is to talk a little bit about things that you absolutely have to do because they're APIs that we have changed. So they're, a lot of the time breaking changes, unfortunately, or, things that have become deprecated will be removed in the future. And then we'll switch over to talk about what's new and exciting once we get through some of these. The first, probably one of the biggest areas, and I'm not going to cover all of the changes on these slides, is Parameter API. And this really stems from our team trying to switch to from very kind of constrained built-in capabilities to more extensible capabilities based on Forge. And so that applies to us replacing a lot of a few enumerators in preparation for kind of future capabilities that we want to have in Revit to a more extensible infrastructure. So this applies to these kind of Forge type IDs and derived classes. There are a number of different enumerators that have been deprecated in this release. That includes unit, group, and parameter type. And then there's a couple that we kind of recommend not using anymore. The impact of this change is actually quite extensive because these are used all over the place in other methods. I didn't document them here, but you can check out what's new in the API documentation to find all the impacts of this change. But this will kind of in the future, you may have seen like what we were able to do with units. We did the first, our first step of this with units. We were able to introduce 70 new units in 2021.1. We want to start being able to do the same thing with parameters. So this is kind of a step in that direction. You may not see a lot of UI changes yet, but we're kind of reworking the guts of Revit to improve the way we do parameters. That also means that we're trying to generalize some of the parameter implementations. So the definition class now has kind of a more generic get data type method. And that will actually return, asking that you have to clarify what kind of parameter it is. Is it, is it a unit measurement parameter? Is it a family type parameter, kind of which actually starts to return categories? So again, you can find more documentation here through the what's new in API. And then the other thing is this, this kind of has far-reaching implications. We are trying to clean up things like shared parameters, kind of how we define parameters, so we don't have a bunch of different parameter definitions. So that, again, I'm not going to cover every single change here, but it's, if you work with parameters at all, you're going to want to look at this documentation. And then we also introduced a bunch of utility classes to make things a little bit easier and more accessible. So lots of changes around parameters, but I look forward to actually being able to do cooler things with them in the future. Other changes include work sharing API. So we have changed the exceptions for these models because we are now we've changed the implementation and what you can do in terms of saving a cloud model and converting it into a cloud path. So please be careful. Take note of the changes to the exceptions that are actually thrown by these methods. We've also changed the floor API. We've moved the creation methods to be more consistent. We've kind of been doing this across different elements for a number of years. So now we've done it with floors. We've moved it out of document and into the floor class. One kind of improvement that's actually come in, as far as the API as a change is the introduction of multi-leader tags. So you have these tags that can actually reference multiple objects or multiple pieces of an object, and they can also kind of count how many there are in terms of the tag and things like that. But the big deal in terms of the API is that, oops, sorry. The big deal in terms of the API is that Independent tag actually has been, a lot of the methods and properties have been replaced to update for multiple references as opposed to just one. So the traditional tags will still only have one reference, but that will just be the first reference in an array as opposed to an individual piece. So a lot of different methods that have actually changed here. And there's a couple of new methods associated with being able to add and remove references as well as identify whether a tag actually has multiple leaders or is a single leader tag like traditional tags have been. Revision APIs. So we've done quite a bit of work on revisions this year, and we'll kind of come back to that a little bit later. But for the purposes of changes, we have actually changed the terminology in the Revit UI. So that kind of is reflected in the API as well. So you can start to see, we're changing settings to numbering sequences because we've introduced this concept of sequences. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but if you're using these methods, you'll probably want to update them. Import and export API changes. So views are now optional for imports and links. That's not entirely true for every single class. I believe DGN is an exception where that will still require a view, but a lot of other ones do not. So you can actually just, you don't have to provide an explicit view if you're creating an import or a link. We've also done some renaming. So we've actually renamed a property from master units to working units for DGN export. We've also updated the postable commands. So the cool thing is that we've added 70 new commands to postable command enum. So you can now go ahead and post those to these better match the Revit UI. While we're doing this cleanup, we also did rename a bunch of entries in this enum. And that means that unfortunately, there's no way for us to deprecate it for a release. So you will have to make those changes in this release. And then some commands have been removed from Revit UI. So they've also been removed from this enum. So changes to built-in failures. So there's a couple of failure definitions that have been renamed. Essentially changed to be kind of more accurate to what they do. So again, there's no way for us to actually make these obsolete. So these are changes. If you are triggering on these specific failures and doing some sort of special operation, you are going to have to change your code this year. Filter API changes. So so there's basically been a, the filter string rule has kind of been obsoleted and replaced. So we basically have a new constructor that you'll just have to adopt again, or I guess maybe not this year, but maybe in the year after. Maybe a significant change for some people, but from our experience, not a lot of people are using this functionality due to some technical limitations of the components that we have. We've actually had to discontinue Ruby support in the macro environment. That means that you'll no longer be able to create Ruby macros. And then the other thing is that if there are Ruby macros in the document and that document is upgraded, those macros will be deleted. Let's see, transmission API data changes. So when using eTransmit, eTransmit will actually now store data about system analysis reports in this kind of user data field. The API method is not changed. We're just basically introduced additional storage that allows for these reports to be included in eTransmit as a reference. see. Reinforcement API. Reinforcement now has basically 2 diameter values. So now we kind of reflect both the nominal and the model diameter. The original methods and properties here actually refer to model diameter, but now you've been replaced with new properties that are either that are specific to either model or nominal diameter. In terms of MEP, there's been a couple of electrical changes that that are members that have been deprecated and replaced, these are replaced actually because the original methods used method and property used long as an input, which was not consistent with the UI and caused a lot of weird issues. I believe that's been updated to be a double now instead of a long. And then fabrication API, there's been a terminology change where we renamed groups to palettes. And so because of that, there's a number of methods in these classes that have to do with the fabrication service that have been replaced with a new name. And last but not least, for changes, we are removing obsolete APIs like we do every single year. Okay, so that just gets us through the changes. Next step is to talk a little bit about enhancements. It's important to note that not every single enhancement in the upcoming release is included here or reflected in the API. We've got somewhere in the vicinity of 70 Revit ideas that are going to be coming, or kind of customer enhancement Revit ideas that are going to be coming out in this release. Not everything is captured here because not everything has an impact on the API. If there are any missing APIs, please do let us know. Sometimes we miss stuff, although we do have a policy generally that anything that makes sense to be available in the API is actually available in the API. All right. So in terms of enhancements, there's actually some really cool stuff. I'm very excited that we finally were able to make happen. This is one of them. You can now create ceilings in the API. It's been a long time request. I know it's been a huge gap. We actually have introduced these 2 creation methods for slope ceilings and just regular ceilings. A minor change to floors is the ability to get the default floor type, so you can find out what the default is, so you can actually go ahead and make changes based on what Revit will actually do as a default. In other modeling enhancements, we've focused on tapered walls. So we did slanted walls last year. We heard that the next most important thing was tapered walls, so we've actually added that capability. And you can start to see that you can also certainly create just using the regular wall tool, and you can assign a specific layer to have variable thickness. There are associated APIs with this change, but they're not necessarily just limited to this. We've actually now allow you to provide a profile sketch in general. So this is not applicable to taper walls as much. But for slanted and tapered walls, you can now get a cross section and identify whether a cross section is valid. We have a number of new enumerations that are associated with the functionality for tapered walls to kind of understand where things are, kind of how things are measured, and to kind of define that cross section of a tapered wall. And one other change to walls is for compound structures. We've added a new method that can identify whether the compound structure can be used to split or merge regions. and then this is kind of a new validator that's associated with kind of merging regions or splitting regions in a wall. And probably one of the, but at least in my opinion, one of the biggest gaps in the Revit API has historically been the ability to modify sketched elements. So the sketched elements is anything that have a sketch that includes walls, openings, ceilings, floors. And so I'm very, very happy to say that we have now introduced this functionality for those elements. You can actually go ahead and edit the sketch, get all the information that you need without having to delete the objects in it and recreate it, which is what a lot of the editing capabilities had been for sketches in the past. So things that are new, there's now the ability to get a sketch ID from the object that you're interested, that's a ceiling, floor, wall, or opening. Given a sketch, you can find out what its owning element is, and you can kind of go back to that owner element. And then Sketch now has a method called getAllElements, which will return everything that is part of that sketch. So that could be model lines, that could be dimensions, or reference planes. The way that you edit a sketch is by creating a sketch edit scope. When you're inside that scope, you can go ahead and add or delete or modify elements that are inside that sketch. Like I said, it's only supported at this point for those 4 different types of elements. You start the scope, and when you are inside the scope, you can only edit things that are inside the sketch. You cannot edit anything outside the sketch. When you complete the scope, then you can go ahead and edit things outside the sketch, and then completing the scope will then update the sketched element. And then you can, if you're curious, like, can this element support sketch editing or not? We've got a convenient method to go ahead and answer that question. And then we've also got a validation method for ceilings and floors. These can be quite complicated, especially because of multiple loops, which is why we have this validation method. Okay. Another big enhancement to the API, and I might be a little bit biased because I am responsible for Revit Cloud Work Sharing, is the ability to programmatically create cloud models and link them together. And this is kind of a big deal because while the API just allows the creation of this, but essentially what it enables is for an add-in to actually upload an entire project and link everything together, so that doesn't have to be manually, which can be quite tedious right now for our customers. So the first thing I mentioned is there's the ability to initiate. So what we've done is it's not a new method, but it is an extension of Save as Cloud Model. So this now works with work shared cloud models. So you can go ahead and put them directly into the BIM 360 BIM Collaborate Pro project, which is previously BIM 360 Design. We also extended the create and load from link capability to also include kind of cloud paths that reference Revit Cloud Work Sharing models. Again, not a new method, but a new capability for the existing method that was working with cloud models for Revit, which are non-work shared cloud models. We've also added a number of methods to help identify a model and kind of discover it as part of kind of the bigger Forge ecosystem in Forge DM. So that includes access to getting what the hub ID is for a specific model, the project ID, cloud folder ID, and then the URN of the model itself. And I just wanted to actually show a video on this one. This is a demo put together by our awesome folks in Forge. And this, what it starts to do is actually migrates a team-based project over to Autodesk Docs. And it's pretty cool. So basically what happens here is that there's a browse to a folder, you download those models. And then the next step that this will do is you actually can go ahead and specify where you want the upload to happen in Docs. And then it can actually go ahead and take all those models and upload them to this new Docs environment, to a Docs folder. And by the way, the really cool thing about this is going to be a sample. So we don't want you to have to figure this out by yourself. We actually want to make it available to you. So I think that that's kind of one of the great things is, we can show you how to basically start to implement this. In this case, now it's uploading, and soon we'll be able to see these models in Revit. Really, really big boost in terms of productivity. And here they are in Revit. Cool. Okay. Another enhancement that we've made to the UI is the ability to freely rotate any tag. So previously, this was kind of something you had to do as a parameter. You had to kind of finagle around with it, make it, build custom families to do it. Pretty painful. Now we've made it really easy. And the cool thing is the API for this is also really easy. We have one new property that is called rotation angle. And that will actually allow you to rotate a tag. So nice and easy. I love it, even when the API is just that simple. Another huge request. This is the #1 rated Revit idea for the API was the ability to do color fills and provide access to those. So that was absolutely something that we did. We wanted to make sure that you're able to create API options, you're able to create color schemes, you're able to place legends. And so there's an associated API for all of that. There's definitely more detail. Another big benefit as we were doing this, we actually changed the default colors in the color scheme. So Revit should in the future look a little bit prettier out of the box as well. In terms of the APIs associated with this, I did not cover every single method or property, but I did want to give you a high level summary of the classes. We've got a color fill scheme class and a color fill scheme entry class that kind of represent our parallel to capabilities in the UI. We've also got additions to view to get and set the color fill scheme ID. So you can actually control what the behavior is of the view. And then we've also got a new color fill legend class, which allows you to place and control legends. So hopefully this is a reasonably complete API. Again, if there's something that's missing here, we've kind of been gathering feedback for almost a year here. So hopefully we didn't miss anything, but if we did, just let us know. As far as capabilities go, this has been one of the top overall Revit ideas that's been requested is a native Revit PDF exporter. So we now have that capability, and that includes not only being able to set individual sheets or kind of group sheets and kind of have a lot of control there. There was also a request around being able to do custom naming. So we actually do also support that. You can start to kind of assemble naming rules based on parameters that you find in sheets. And you can go ahead and kind of name these things automatically as you export. As far as APIs for this go, they're actually fairly short. So we kind of have the ability to call export on a document and provide PDF options that control all the settings that you kind of saw in the UI earlier. We also have a export PDF settings, which allows you to kind of store specific settings in the document. Okay. Another enhancement is the ability to link Rhino. So we've had import of Rhino models for a while. We now have the ability to link them as well, which means that if the original source Rhino model changes, it will automatically update in Revit, much like other links do. Let's see. In terms of APIs for this, we've basically have two new methods, one to import and to link. I believe that import was previously not available to the API, so now we have the ability to do that. And then you can specify a 3DM file as the input to link or import Rhino. Another area that's gotten a lot of attention this year are direct shapes. So direct shapes are something that we are constantly improving because we're actually using them ourselves for all of these imports and things like that. So, anytime we improve Rhino import or Rhino, linking, we are actually improving direct shapes because we are, eating our own dog food, so to say. So what you start to see here is the ability to add references to direct shapes. And that includes, you can basically add reference curves, reference planes, reference points to both direct shapes and direct shape types. And the reason that this is kind of really interesting is if you have a named reference, that can be used by Revit, much like it can use other named references, for tools that can refer to them. So this basically starts to make a direct shape much more like a generic Revit object, and it provides a lot more flexibility in terms of how things are referenced to each other. We also have the ability to now add custom family names. So if you want to change the name to be something more helpful, you absolutely now have the API capability to do so. More on direct shapes. You can start to see that this is a very brief summary of everything that we have. So it's important that we've added this idea of an external geometry. And that allows kind of a unique identifier that can be maintained as things change, so that references aren't broken in the end. So that includes, so basically what you have is something that is an externally tagged geometry object that is kind of more stable than it previously would have been. The BREP builder persistent IDs allows you to actually build these things with these persistent IDs and create kind of the ability to associate tags with a face or an edge so that they're uniquely identified and that they're consistent as the direct shape is updated. And then you can basically access all these things, kind of identify whether something has externally tagged geometry, or you want to add it, or you remove it, you want to reset it. There's a bunch of methods both on direct shape and direct shape type to do so. All right, I'm gonna have to speed up a little bit. All right, I'm already talking really fast. So document open options. So a lot of the time when you're opening a document, you might encounter an extensible schema storage conflict. We now have the option to ignore that during open. Just be aware that this will actually delete the schema if you go ahead and ignore it. View API enhancements. So one big one that that's been requested is the ability to actually control the label position for a view on sheet. We've introduced a couple of properties to be able to do that. So now you can actually automate placement of views on sheets and make it look reasonable without kind of being constrained to it always being on the left side. And then for call out views, you can actually ask it for its parent ID and it'll tell you what its original view is. So kind of building out that relationship between views. other enhancements to views in general is the ability to create or to view grids in 3D. So you can start to see that there's a lot of kind of capabilities in terms of what this can do in the UI, but this is kind of an extension. We did levels in 3D, now we're doing grids in 3D because we really want to encourage people to work more in 3D if we can. As far as APIs go, not a huge amount, but you can start to control visibility at the view level. You can start to hide them, identify which levels actually show grids, and so a bunch of utility APIs to basically control visibility and access. Another cool API feature is temporary graphics and controls. And the controls part is the really interesting thing, because what this allows you to do is this actually allows you to create in-canvas controls that a user can click on and take an action. So this is really powerful tool because I'm really happy that we're able to expose the API, because there's really no good way to do this previously in Revit. Other than trying to create weird 3D geometries. Now it's a little bit simpler. So we kind of have this temporary graphics manager that allows the creation of these things. In-canvas control data stores a reference to the image. And then the temporary graphics manager has the ability to add a control, update the control, and remove the control. Oops, I skipped a slide. Sorry. Multiple values. So a lot of the time we've heard from customers that when you select multiple objects that have different values for the same parameter, it always displayed blank in the Revit UI. There's like no text, and there's really no way to tell, is there no value or is it not? We now have the ability to actually define what you want that representation to be. So that can be varies or whatever it is that's desired in your model. And you can start to set this at both a model level, but you can also customize it for schedules. So individual properties in the schedule can actually override that and have different behavior for that schedule. So these are kind of the associated APIs. So you have a generic class that's called multiple values indication settings that allows you to define the generic behavior between properties, palette, tags, and schedules. And then for schedules, you have the ability to kind of customize that display type. So you can define what you want to use, whether you want to use a project-based definition or a custom text, or something that's specific to this individual property. Okay, dimensions. We just have more information, more access to a dimension. You now have the ability to control text position, leader end position, leader, kind of leaders and elbows. And then also you have the ability to control prefix and suffix. So we've made the API for dimensions more flexible, and including some capabilities that we improved in the UI while we're doing it. There's also new additions to the API for shared coordinates. So what we have is the reset shared coordinates, and then you can identify whether a base point, a survey point that's a base point, has been clipped or not. So new enhancements. Reset shared coordinates is consistent with the UI functionality. If you want to learn more, I suggest taking a look at what reset coordinates does, because it does quite a few things at the same time. Revisions are, I mentioned earlier that we did a bunch of work in revisions. So this is, we introduced revision sequences. And this is important because it allows a lot more flexibility with the revisions, but it also allows conformance with ISO 19650 standards. And so that's not only actually the revision sequences themselves, but it also basically we've been able to define a minimum number of digits. So a lot of ISO standards basically require something with a letter and then 001 if it's the first one. You can actually accomplish that now with revisions, so a lot more flexible. there has an associated API. So we have the equivalent API capabilities. So we have revision numbering sequences, define what the sequences are. We have, for a given revision, you can set what its sequence ID is. And then we have the access to minimum units, or sorry, minimum digits, as I mentioned earlier. Miscellaneous APIs. So utility methods for levels to get the closest level to a specific elevation. Phasing, API improvements to make sure that you can't set phases that don't make sense for a given element. And then geometry APIs for meshes identify whether a mesh is closed or not. We also have a point cloud API now. So while this is really only one method as far as Revit goes, it actually provides access to the Revit, the Recap SDK. So for Recap point clouds that are in Revit, you can start to get a lot of information out of those by using the Recap SDK. That does require the recap wrapper.dll to be able to work with it. But once you do that, you have access to a lot more point cloud capability than you're able to get directly with the Revit API. We also introduced civil alignments in 2021.1. We now have an API equivalent for those. This also requires an additional DB application, DLL for civil alignments. So these are created by import from InfraWorks and kind of represent an alignment in Revit. And so what you have is you have an alignment class and alignment station label. So you can basically start to take, modify and control these alignments in Revit, as well as being able to tag them. Moving rebar and set. So a lot of the time there is a need due to clashes or conflicts to move one rebar in a set. We've actually made that much easier, so you can actually go ahead and do that. And then there's also equivalent APIs. So you start to see with all these in the rebar set, you can start to understand how to move a bar, and you have associated methods to allow you to do that. You can also remove individual bars from a rebar set. So if you need to skip one, you can actually go ahead and do that. And then you can also do the same thing for path reinforcement. You can actually modify the position of an individual bar. It does not work in the other types. I don't believe it works in area reinforcement or whatever the other one is that I can't think of off the top of my head. More information about reinforcement. So there's kind of access to these reinforcement layers now. So quite a number of methods that provide information about the layers and control for how those layers behave. We now have the ability to convert a rebar in system into individual bars. So if you essentially want to explode it, we now have the capability to do that through the API. You can also get the center lines for rebar. And I think this new method, what it does is it actually gives you the center lines in the transformed location. So previously you actually had to apply post-apply a transform. This makes it much easier because this actually gives it in the actual location of the rebar in the project. And then there's a few different access properties for freeform rebar that kind of correspond kind of these capabilities in the UI, and including setting what the reported shape is, so they can actually specify saying I'm a shape X even though I'm a freeform rebar. 3 slides to go. We're almost there. Mechanical systems. So mechanical systems, a number of changes. There are new properties that allow access to setting the heating temperature, cooling temperature, humidification, and dehumidification. It should be humidification. Set point values. So this is for building and space types. We also have the same capability for mechanical systems analysis. We also have, in addition to zones, that gets the offset distance for that specific zone to the associated level. And then we also have the ability to control report styles for reports in analysis. Other enhancements in MAP, so more control of hidden line settings through the API. So this is basically UI capabilities that have now been made available to the API. We have electrical panel schedules, and that now has a new property is auto shading for load display, which controls the display shading. And then we also have a new capability in for fabrication models to convert into a fabrication model, design model to fabrication model. So what you can do is you can set up a map that basically connects relates family instances to fabrication parts. And then when that map is applied, those things are automatically converted. And last but not least, energy analysis. We've got a few different settings that actually improve the energy analytical model that are, or change the energy analytical model that's exported to GBXML. So the analysis mode, rooms or spaces, defines whether this analysis should pay attention to rooms or spaces. And then these analysis mode settings specify whether an energy model is produced based on a specific analysis type. And that was likely to be expanded in the future as we start to go into more and more analysis. With that, I am done talking. I am only 3 minutes over time, so that's exciting. I apologize for going so quickly. If you have questions, please feel free to add them in the Q&A, and I will go ahead and try to answer them there. And I will hand it off to Augusto to talk about Civil 3D.
Thank you, Sasha. Sasha, there's a few questions in QA. Maybe if you can answer in a QA while Augusto is speaking.
Yep.
Yeah.
No, if you wanna answer the questions live, it's also okay.
Is it okay? You still have
yeah,
time?
sure.
Yeah. Then Sasha, maybe we can spend a few more minutes.
Yeah, sure. So the first question was, will the temporary graphics API replace the direct context API, or will direct context remain? So it is not intended to be a replacement, because direct context is really meant to be kind of a broader model, bringing in a model and showing that. The temporary graphics API is really intended very specifically for controls that are displayed on screen that allow a user to take an action. .NET version. I'm trying to remember what I said last year. It has not changed this year. And so I would have mentioned that. I believe it's 4.8.
Yeah.
And then when do I expect Revit 2022 to be available? I can't even guarantee that kind of release will actually happen. So unfortunately, I can't give a date, but you can make logical assumptions based on previous years.
Great. Thank you very much. Okay. Augusto?
Yes, thank you, Sasha. I think you have to stop sharing.
Thank you.
And let me stop recording and start again.